We'll ignore 350 previous years because of the way we define it today, and we lose our heritage as a result. James Wilson, signer of the Declaration and the Constitution, called a master builder of the Constitution, second most active member of the Constitutional Convention. He's a Supreme Court attorney put on the court by George Washington. He started the first legal training in America. I have his original law books. While he was sitting on the Supreme Court, he taught law school, and this is what he taught students. He said very simply, Christianity is part of the common law. Seventh Amendment, right there. Christianity is part of it. We put that right in the Constitution. You have the same thing from Joseph Story some 30 years later. Joseph Story said this. He says, one of the beautiful boasts of our municipal jurisprudence is that Christianity is part of the common law. Now, he's considered the father of American jurisprudence. When the U.S. Supreme Court put by James Madison, he said, there never has been a period in which the common law did not recognize Christianity as lying at its foundations. And the court agreed, by the way. You look at some of the court decisions, Christianity is part of the common law. 1844, Christianity is and always has been part of the common law. 1892, I can show you other decisions. It's not a godless document. But see, we've redefined common law, so it is now, because we don't use the same definition we used for all those years. And in closing this one out for the break, common law, I have to speak just a minute about common law indictments, because we still have common law indictments, but they're a little bit different. Do you know what the form was for common law indictments? Standard legal form till 1972. Common law indictment. Dave Barton. It says, Dave Barton, not having the fear of God before his eyes, did murder his neighbor. That was a standard indictment form, was you always said not having the fear of God. Dave Barton, not having the fear of God before his eyes, did burn down his neighbor's house and commit arson. David Barton, not having the fear of God before his eyes, did enter a grocery store on the night of whatever and stole from us. Fear of God. That was a standard indictment form till 1972 for common law violations. Tell me it's a godless constitution. Ain't no way. But see, modernism causes us to think that the way it is now is the way it's always been. It's not.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Since the Ten Commandments have formed the basis of civil law in the Western world for over 2,000 years, an individual is more likely to find a copy of them in a government building rather than a religious one. Yet amazingly, numerous rulings over recent years now make it unconstitutional to display the commandments in many public arenas. Consider what Founding Father John Adams said about this. He declared, the moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred as the laws of God, anarchy and tyranny commence. If thou shalt not covet and thou shalt not steal were not commandments of heaven, they must be made inviolable precepts in every society before it can be civilized or made free. John Adams believed that no society could remain civilized if separated from the Ten Commandments.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact Wall Builders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
So looking at still modernism and some of the stuff that's there modernism, I'm going to go back to, we were talking about Sundays accepted. So Sundays accepted, this is that court decision says, Christianity is a part of the common law of the land with liberty of conscience to all. It's always been so recognized. The U.S. Constitution allows it as a part of the common law. The President is allowed 10 days to sign a bill with the exception of Sunday. And that was one of the proofs, that Sunday's accepted clause was one of the proofs that it was a Christian document, not a godless document. Now, that whole idea, the reason that was significant was, of course, back then, every state had Sabbath laws, and they were dead serious about those Sabbath laws. Those Sabbath laws remained actively enforced through the 1960s when you have the McGowan, Maryland case. And by the way, they're still available in any state today. Court has never struck down the blue laws, the Sabbath laws. They're still out there. It's just that nobody's done them since the 60s to speak of. I can still remember 20 years ago where they said, well, you can't sell liquor on Sundays or you can't sell bread or, but now they're pretty much all gone. So kids grow up now, have no clue what a Sabbath law is or what a blue law or anything else. But back then, it was dead serious stuff. I mean, it was in every statute book. It was never considered to be unconstitutional in any way, shape, fashion, or form. And modernism has made it seem like, well, that doesn't really apply. Sundays is not a special day, and that clause doesn't mean anything. But it did to the Founding Fathers, because every one of their states had Sabbath laws. Thomas Jefferson is actually the one who wrote the Sabbath law in his state of Virginia, which punished people who broke the Sabbath. Thomas Jefferson, the separation church and state guy. See, that's modernism. We think it means nothing now, so we don't even look back to see what he did on issues like that. So this aspect of being really significant, it's interesting that when we moved into the Capitol, U.S. Capitol, the first 10, 11 years of federal life was spent in Philadelphia and then in New York City and then Philadelphia. We moved into Washington, D.C. in 1800. They moved into the U.S. Capitol, which was a little bitty square building. You can't see the left edge of it over there, but it was just a tiny square building. The U.S. Capitol was about half of this room. That's how big the Capitol was when it opened in 1800. So when they moved in there, November 22nd of 1800, they said, okay, the House gets the biggest room, the Senate gets this room, the Supreme Court gets this room, committees will meet. They divided it all up. 2 weeks of deciding who gets where. Then on the 4th of December, according to the records of Congress, which you see right here, Thursday, December the 4th, it said the Speaker informed the House that the chaplains had proposed, if agreeable to the House, to hold divine service every Sunday in the House chamber. Now, to get this done, what the plan was, the House and Senate chaplain proposed to have church every Sunday in the Capitol, and they would alternate. House chaplain have it one week, Senate chaplain have it next. They could either preach themselves or bring somebody in to preach, didn't matter. To get this done took the approval of both bodies. So the Speaker of the House at that time was Theodore Sedgwick. The House approved it. The President of the Senate at that time was Thomas Jefferson, and Jefferson said, yep, let's do it. The Senate approved it. So you have approval from the House and the Senate to start this church in the Capitol, and it started there with the approval on the 4th of December 1800. Significantly, that thing really grew. Now, Jefferson attended as vice president when he's Senate president. It means he's vice president. He attended it then. He also attended it for 8 years while being a president. It's interesting that a number of people who served under him during his presidential administration, including the Reverend Manasseh Cutler, who is a member of Congress from Massachusetts, did not like Jefferson, was a political opponent of Jefferson. That political campaign of 1800, probably the most vicious in American history, the Federalist versus the Anti-Federalist. He is a Federalist. He hates Anti-Federalists. Jefferson's an Anti-Federalist. He worked against Jefferson, but they're going to church together on Sunday. And Manasseh Cutler kept a very extensive diary of what went on in his time in Congress. And he wrote very often about how that Jefferson would always make church, regardless of what the weather was. Here's one of the examples. He says, if you can read his handwriting, it says, on the Sabbath it was very rainy, but his ardent, meaning Jefferson, his ardent zeal brought him through the rain and on horseback to the hall. Jefferson did not let rain, and riding your horse from the White House to the Capitol is 1.6 miles. It's about a 20-minute ride on horseback. Didn't matter if it was raining, if it was snowing, if it was hailing. Whatever the weather was, Jefferson didn't miss church on Sundays over at the Capitol. And in addition to going to church at the Capitol, Jefferson went there, but he thought there was a way he could also help improve the church services at the Capitol. So Jefferson, President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief, had the Marine Corps Band come play the worship services at the church at the Capitol. Now, how cool is that to have the Marine Corps Band as your church worship band? You know, that'd be a lot of fun. But that's what Jefferson did. Also, one of the senators who was there at the time was the young John Quincy Adams. He was a Federalist senator, again, opposed to Jefferson. Jefferson was a friend. He didn't have the opposition the others did because his dad, John Adams, and Jefferson had been friends back in the Revolution, and so, you know, they knew each other from that standpoint. And he's a U.S. senator. He kept a very meticulous diary as well, and this is what you'll find numerous Sundays in his diary entry. He says, attended public service at the Capitol where Mr. Rattoon, an Episcopal clergyman from Baltimore, preached a sermon. Now, John Quincy Adams would tell you where he went to church on Sunday, what the sermon was, what verses they used. He would critique the sermon. He was a huge Bible scholar himself. He read the Bible in 7 languages. He wrote books on the Bible. He wrote poetry. He's the only published poet that is a president of the United States. Only president of the United States to have published poetry, and it was religious poetry. He would take the Psalms and rewrite the Psalms into modern language. And he was really into the Bible, and he would go to church with Jefferson at the Capitol. He also wrote of other services. He says religious services usually performed on Sundays at the Treasury office and at the Capitol. I went both forenoon and afternoon to the Treasury. Their services there, Jefferson started church not only at the Capitol, but also at the Treasury and also at the War Department, also at the Navy Yard. So if you want to go to church in Washington, D.C., you can take your choice of going to church at the Capitol or the Treasury Department or the Navy Yard or the War Department, all started by Jefferson. And we're told, oh no, there was, see, that was a Sundays accepted clause. You did not do federal work on Sundays. The government shut down on Sundays, so we turned it into church on Sundays. And that's what the government buildings were used for on Sundays. Jefferson praised the use of government buildings by churches or government buildings letting religious services happen on Sunday. He said in his own state of Virginia, his own city of Charlottesville, he loved the fact the courthouse was used for church services on Sunday. I mean, that was just typical for what it was back then. So that was part of it. I love the fact that U.S. Congress in 1857, when it was describing the duties of the officers of the House and Senate, you've got the clerk and you've got the chaplains and you've got the sergeant, all these are officers. Here's what it said about chaplains. It says, at every session, 2 chaplains are elected, one by each house, whose duty is to conduct religious services weekly in the hall of the House of the Representatives. We put chaplains in here because they're supposed to preach every Sunday to us members of Congress. That's what we have on Sunday. That was the duty of the Now, you won't find a chaplain doing that today, and if you try to do that today, you're going to face all the lawsuits that everybody can think of, because that's unconstitutional. But that's that modernism thing, because we don't have a clue what it used to be. We think it's unconstitutional today. By 1867, you'll find that the church at the Capitol was the largest church in Washington, D.C., the largest Protestant church in the United States. There were 2,000 people a week that went to church in the hall of the House, that building right down there. 2,000 a week on that end of the Capitol, south end of the Capitol, went to church every week. And there were also a total of 4 churches that met in the Capitol every Sunday. So you had all sorts of communities, churches that would meet there, First Presbyterian, First Congregational. All these other churches would also meet in the Capitol on Sunday. So there was just nothing secular in thinking. The Sundays Accepted clause was definitely a religious clause, always understood to be that, but under modernism, we don't understand that.